anyways, what was the question again? Was it weird, strange for
Yeah,
me watching this happen?
what was it like to actually be there and watch that all unfold?
Well, in 2015, a new president came on, and I was working media. I worked in the media department, so I was on camera or behind camera or manning the camera, which you're not supposed to say anymore. I was personing the camera for most of these events. So if you actually scrub the footage, you'll see me in the room. Like, you can't see how aghast my face is because it's behind the camera. But um, the in 2015, two other things happened. The Evergreen State College president George Bridges comes onto the scene, and he reframes the entire college around social justice very explicitly. He says that the civil rights movement has done a lot of strides, but we are nowhere near finished, and we need to have these conversations about race and inequality and privilege and all this stuff. So I highly recommend you go down these things. That happened that same September. Was when the University of Chicago released a letter called the Chicago Principles, saying that we will not have any safe spaces. Like, we are here, your education is about debating ideas. And George Bridges, the president of the Evergreen State College, wrote a counter article to that, saying no, college students need safe spaces. And I just think that's really interesting. Like, that's the background. Also, that was the same time, and you know what? I might be wrong here. The Chicago letter might have been in 2016. But anyways, in 2015, the event happened at Yale, where the Professor Christakis, two professors, the wife professor writes this blog post or this letter to the campus about being able to be an adult for yourself and choosing what Halloween costume you want to wear. Don't let the administration coddle you and tell you not to be offensive. You are adults. You can make the decision on your own. That caused, an uprising because nominally the black students wanted that coddling, and they thought that was an invitation for micro and macro aggressions. And there's this really interesting piece of footage where Nicholas Christakis is, really patiently trying to rationally speak with the uprising students or the agitated students about liberalism, about freedom of speech, about critical thought and open debate. And they're screaming at him and getting like really weepy and histrionic. And the famous line from that is this black student eventually gets so agitated, she says, "This is not about creating an intellectual space. This is about creating a home here."
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then one other event that happened in 2015 at the same time, this little known Canadian professor named Jordan Peterson, or Jordan B. Peterson, if you're having a hard time finding him on the internet, he kind of stood up against this Canadian legislation called Bill C-16, which in his mind was it was about extending the Canadian civil rights to include gender and gender representation as a protected category. And Jordan B. Peterson made a statement about how that is kind of basically compelled speech, which means that the government can basically litigate if you don't say the words that other people want you to say. And he was also protested at the same time. And so off of the Evergreen State College campus, I saw the wave. I saw the tremors of campus illiberalism backfiring on itself and really damaging or potentially damaging the ability for a college to function as a place of learning. And so when I attended these orientations and seminars that the Evergreen State College faculty, empowered by the George Bridges administration, were putting students through, and I saw these incredibly strong illiberal statements being made by the professors about how Evergreen is a white supremacist institution and we need to teach white people about their privilege, and we need to stop the people of color from being, oppressed by the privilege of this institution. And a lot of statements that I can't recall totally, but I lay that out, and I'm sitting there on camera. I'm like, this isn't going to end well. I'm watching my professors go backwards in time, like really regress into this. Well, one, incredibly religious mindset. And I grew up in church. My father's
Mhm.
a pastor. So I noticed the tone of everything was shifting into a very religious sort of mindset, coupled with this incredibly racist or racializing frame of mind that divided everybody up based on their race, assigned them privilege or oppression, and then worked to decrease one's privilege and, well, no, yeah, decrease one's privilege and decrease one's oppression. So everybody's the same. But in practice, and we can get into this more, you can't actually decrease somebody's privilege in a learning environment. You can't
Right.
stop somebody from being intelligent. You can't dampen somebody's engagement with the material. And that's what they wanted to do. I was explicitly asked to calm down as a learner so that people who were not interested in the material could have more room to be interested. But that's not how interest, curiosity, and intelligence.
Right. And actually, just I watched a clip of you last night talking about this, where you had, I think you had just started as a student and you went into one of your classes and you asked questions of the other students and did what college students are supposed to do. And you were kind of not necessarily given a little slap on the wrist, but told kind of, be a little quieter so that other people can speak up. And the people that the professor wanted to speak up were literally sleeping through class. They didn't want to.
Literally. Yeah. That was my second day of class, and that was very interesting to me. My professor, who I'm just going to name her, Lisa Sweet, was my professor, and I deeply admire her skill as an artist. She's an artist, but I strongly question how her this theology, which she has taken from Robin DiAngelo, who is the author of White Fragility, is probably going to be, if Biden gets elected, Robin DiAngelo is probably going to be Betsy DeVos's replacement. It's like this stuff is coming down the pipes. White fragility and white privilege will be assigned to you to take in every major corporation and institution of higher education, and probably the government from now on. So
Yeah.
this is very important stuff to understand. But in practice, I saw how my professor would try to restrain us engaged people, which ended up being older students, which ended up being like white men, trying to restrain us to assign us less engagement with the material in order to give room for these marginalized people, in her eyes, to be more engaged. But every time there was this one class where she really, really wanted these students to be engaged. So she said, everybody can only speak twice, right? Which, it's one thing if she would have said, everybody's required to speak twice, but she's like, everybody can only speak twice. So us normal people who were like wrestling with these ideas about iconoclasm, which is really interesting, about the destruction of images, which is really interesting in this cultural moment that we're in. Like we are living through a rebooted cultural revolution. But anyway, so we would end up, the older students, the more engaged students, we just disengaged. So everybody in the class was disengaged. And I remember she looking at me, my professor looking at me, like wanting me to step in. I'm like, well, I'm a white male. I can't talk anymore. Like maybe I'm going to want to say something later on down the road. So it's a very backwards ideology that is so certain of its righteousness and its correctness. And I use that term not only in the politically correct phrase, but in its correctness of thinking. It really thinks it's right. That it can't even like criticize itself. It can't even look at how it's actually